Hello and welcome. How effective are boycotts, and could the same approach the world took against apartheid in South Africa work against Israel's occupation of Palestinian lands? In the aftermath of the war on Gaza 1 year ago, activists and academics are feeling inspired and more motivated to rethink their approach to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Most Israelis stood by the war effort to stop the missile attacks coming from Hamas, but the rest of the world watched with alarm as Israel dealt a crippling blow to the 1.5 million beleaguered inhabitants of the Gaza Strip last winter. In the wake of the fighting, tensions rose between Tel Aviv and the United Nations over the Goldstone report, which accused both Israel and Hamas of committing war crimes. Some Israeli leaders have been forced to abandon visits to Europe for fear of arrest on those charges. At the grassroots level, activists and academics around the world have been calling for sanctions against Israel. They include boycotting Israeli goods and services, ending cooperation with Israeli universities and cultural institutions, as well as withdrawing financial investments from Israel. So today we ask, what can really be effective in making Israel change its policy towards the Palestinians? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Well, I'm joined by the Israeli professor who sparked a firestorm earlier this year when he asked the world community to boycott his country to, quote, save Israel from itself. Dr. Neve Gordon is a senior lecturer in the Department of Politics and Government at Ben Gurion University of the Negev. He published a column in the Los Angeles Times and The Guardian endorsing the gradually expanding international boycott of Israel. Professor Gordon is the author of Israel's Occupation, which explores the mechanisms of Israeli power, including the regime of travel permits, recruitment of collaborators, and strategic settlement design. He joins us today from Beersheba in southern Israel. Also with us is Dara Murray, the legal advisor at the Palestinian Center for Human Rights in Gaza, where he researches violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show, and Dr. Gordon, I'll start with you, sir. Thanks for being with us. Just let's establish, why do you feel Israel has to save itself from itself? What has gone wrong, essentially, in your opinion?
Well, Israel has been colonizing the Palestinian people for many years. And I do not want to live in a colonialist state. So I think what we need is to stop this colonial project and stop the occupation of the Palestinian peace, allow the Palestinian to have self-determination, a demand that we demanded from the world many years ago. And now I think the Palestinians should receive the same right.
Now, of course, Professor, you caused huge controversy with these views in the media, and of course it's rare that we in the international media hear these kinds of views publicly aired out of Israel. How many people in Israel do you think support your view?
Very few. Today we had a protest here in Beersheba commemorating the war. About 20 people showed up. In Tel Aviv there was one on Saturday night, 200 people showed up. So there's not a lot of people that are against Israel's policy in the Gaza Strip. And that is part of the problem, that I do not think that a real change will come only from within. And being a member of the Israeli peace camp for over 30 years, I've seen it dwindle and lose its power. And I think we've reached the state that if we want to save Israel from being an apartheid regime and a colonial state, then we need the help of the international community, civil society, churches, unions, and so forth to pressure Israel. And unless Israeli society understand that there's a price for this occupation, it will not end. And therefore I decided to support the BDS. I think it's important to make a distinction that the BDS is not against Israel. It's against Israeli policy. And the BDS itself is not a principle, but actually a strategy. And it's a non-violent strategy to influence Israeli society to stop the occupation.
Well, let me bring in Dara Murray here and sort of establish for our viewers, of course, you research international human rights and international human rights law. And I wonder, looking a year on from what happened in Gaza, what is the sense among the Palestinian people that there might really be some accountability for those attacks in Israel and the kind of toll, the death toll it took?
Well, unfortunately, at the moment, there's very little hope for real accountability. After the Goldstone report, we were very, very optimistic, but as you saw, the international reaction to that was pretty overwhelming, mainly by countries such as the United States and of course Israel with a few key European allies. At the moment, the fight for accountability, it's all to win for, but
Dara,
there's not a lot of progress to date.
I wonder what you make of the attempts to try to get to prosecute Israeli generals and politicians who were involved in the war effort. Do you feel there's going to be any real progress on that front?
Yes, I think there is the potential for real progress, and I think it's one of the most effective ways to bring about change in Israel. One of the things that Dr. Gordon talked about was seeking to end the illegal practices of the Israelis, and accountability is probably the only way to do that. And I believe that if we can get Israeli leaders, both political and military leaders, into a court, then the rule of law will be allowed to take over. Unfortunately, the problem is getting them to the court, and that's where international politics comes in and has frustrated us to date.
Dr. Gordon, let me ask you about, for example, the case of Zippy Livni, who cancelled her trip to London earlier this month after a British court issued a warrant for her arrest on accusations of war crimes. What sign was that Israel's leadership is starting to take these actions seriously?
I think it is taking the action seriously. I think people are briefed before they leave the country. Generals are briefed before they leave the country's politicians. But the reaction within Israel is that this is a sign of anti-Semitism. It leads to a coalescing of and a mobilization of the people around the flag instead of some kind of recognition that maybe we've done something wrong along the way. Maybe our policies are misguided, and maybe it's actually our policies that need to be changed. For example, with the Goldstone report, Goldstone only asked that Israel, or his first request is that Israel investigate itself. If a country feels so confident about what it did in the Gaza Strip, why is it unwilling to investigate itself?
Well, Dara Murray, you know, on the issue of what may change Israel's mind, and of course we've heard the professor talk about boycotts and so on. And I wonder if you could answer a question we got from Israel to our, from Australia to our Your Views page here on Al Jazeera. Salauddin in Adelaide wrote in saying, boycotting Israeli goods is probably the only response global citizens can make. And it's also a good way for us in Western countries to tell our leaders that we are not impressed with their silence regarding Israel's crimes. I wonder, in your opinion, how effective a boycott could be. How much difference could it really make to Israel? Is there the chance it might actually hurt the Palestinians more than the Israelis?
Well, I think they're a very effective part of the overall strategy, but we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. I think the effectiveness of boycott, divestment and sanction is that it raises public opinion. It makes people realize that there is something wrong. As Dr. Gordon says, it's a chance to look inwards and to analyze what Israeli policy has resulted in. But like I said, it's only one part of the overall picture. And I think, well, obviously, as speaking on behalf of PCHR, that accountability is an equally important part of that process.
Now,
for us, our demand is simple. We just want adherence to the rule of law.
Well, Dr. Gordon, if I could put a couple of emails to you. We got first one from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates here, and Mohammed El Khairi wrote in saying, these boycotts can work so long as they form one part of an organized, coordinated and systematic effort to label Zionism a pariah movement and Israel an outlaw state. The BDS movement against Israeli apartheid is one method. This is not a Gentile versus Jew, Palestinian versus Israeli, or Arab versus Hebrew issue. This is a human issue. And one other email came in on this subject from Denmark, if I may put this to you as well, from Steen Raven in Helsingør, who wrote in saying, it is not possible to boycott Israel. Israel is strongly supported by the US, which would never boycott Israel. Europe is critical about Israel, but would never boycott Israel. China is not even critical about Israel and would therefore never boycott it. With the three biggest economies in the world never willing to boycott Israel, what would a boycott help? Let me ask you your opinion on that comment.
Israel is not, by far, is not the worst country in the world. And there's many countries that are committing worse atrocities and are more brutal than Israel. The whole idea of the BDS is that actually with Israel it can practically work, because Israel is not a superpower in terms of its economic. And all we need is that, let's say, universities in the United States divest in their pension funds from companies that are traded on NASDAQ in Israel, and NASDAQ in the United States is beginning with Israeli companies that are part of the occupation and repression of the Palestinian people. We need civil society to come and say, no, we will not buy merchandise that is supporting this occupation. We have to remember that it took about 20 years for the BDS campaign to start working in South Africa, where the Palestinians initiated this campaign 4 or 5 years ago, and it's already having an effect. So it's not going to happen from today to tomorrow, but until the people in Tel Aviv that go to pubs and go to coffee houses and movies and shows and do not feel the occupation, until they start feeling that this occupation has a price and can change their lifestyle, it will not change. Okay. And as someone that cares deeply about his country and about his children and is raising his children, I would like to change the country for my children and for the Palestinian children.
Let's bring in a caller from the United States. In New Hampshire, we've got Wesley on the line. Wesley, go ahead, please.
Yes, I have been watching the news recently, and they'll be talking about reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. But don't you think that if Gaza is reconstructed again without addressing the major issue that caused the destruction of Gaza in the first place, which is the firing of the rocket, don't you think that Gaza will still be destroyed even after it has been reconstructed if the rocket issue is not addressed?
Right. Well, let me put this to Dara Murray. The feeling that if there is an effort to try to rebuild Gaza, unless there's some kind of effort to stop rockets coming out, there's an excuse for Israel to come back in and flatten it again.
Well, I think reconstruction is a very important issue, and as you know, there's been no reconstruction to date. As regards of whether it will happen again, that's why it's so important to address the root causes. That's why we want to hold Israel accountable for its actions, and Palestinian armed groups as well if they commit violations, to ensure that if Israel does respond, that it doesn't do so illegally, that it doesn't target civilian houses or civilians, so that we don't see the scale of destruction, of illegal destruction, that we did this time last year.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to both stand by. We have to take a very short break here, but we're back with more of our discussion in just a moment. Don't go away.